The snow outside the window was falling so heavily that it seemed as if the sky had decided to bury the entire world under a white blanket. The wind howled, throwing handfuls of icy pellets against the glass. The sound made the Miller house feel even cozier inside. In the living room, the fireplace crackled, sending golden sparks into the air where they quickly dissolved into the shadows. Adam, sitting in an old chair with worn upholstery, tossed another log onto the fire. The wood hissed, and the flames greedily enveloped it, filling the room with warm light. "It's good to be home in this weather," he muttered, rubbing his hands together. His voice was low, with a slight roughness, as if he had just come back from outside where the frost bit at his cheeks. Adam was a solidly built man with broad shoulders and a habit of doing everything methodically. He loved this house, which they had bought 10 years ago to escape the city rush. Here, 20 miles from the nearest town, amidst snow-covered fields and scattered rural homes, he felt completely at peace. In the kitchen, Sarah clinked dishes, preparing tea. The aroma of mint and chamomile was already drifting through the house, mixing with the smell of burning wood. She was humming something quiet, almost inaudible, an old song her grandmother used to sing. Sarah was a woman with soft features but a firm character, which showed in small things, like how neatly she folded a towel or how she could quiet an argument between her husband and daughter with just a look. Her brown hair was gathered in a messy bun, with just a few strands escaping to brush her neck. Chloe, their 8-year-old daughter, sat on the floor by the fireplace, legs crossed. An art book lay open before her, and she held colored pencils, drawing something bright and fantastical. Her dark pigtails were slightly tousled, and her cheeks were flushed from the warmth. She mumbled something to herself, making up names for the creatures she drew, which looked like dragons, or perhaps unicorns. From time to time, she looked up at the fire, as if searching for inspiration. "Dad, if the blizzard doesn't stop by morning, are we still going into town tomorrow?" Chloe asked, not looking up from her drawing. Adam chuckled, looking at his daughter. Her curiosity was as boundless as the winter wind. "If the storm doesn't settle, we'll stay home and make pancakes. Right, Sarah?" He turned to his wife, who had just entered the living room with a tray. On it were 3 steaming mugs of tea and a plate of homemade cookies that Chloe adored. Sarah placed the tray on the low wooden coffee table and smiled. "Pancakes are fine, but only if you, Adam, don't burn the pan like last time." Chloe giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Adam pretended to be offended, but the corners of his mouth betrayed a smile. "It happened just once, and that was because you were distracting me with your chatter." The family laughed, and for a moment it seemed that their little home, surrounded by the snowstorm, was the whole world. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm, safe, and peaceful. Sarah sat down on the sofa, pulling her feet up beneath her, and took a mug. She looked at her husband and daughter. Her heart tightened with quiet joy. Evenings like this were rare. Usually, Adam worked late, and Chloe was busy with school or after-school clubs. But today, they were together, and it felt like a small miracle. "Mom, can you tell the story again about how you and Dad met?" Chloe suddenly asked, setting down her pencil. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. She loved the story, even though she had heard it dozens of times. Sarah smiled, taking a sip of tea. Her gaze softened, as if she were traveling back 20 years. "Well, it was in college. I was sitting in the library studying for a final, and your dad—" She didn't manage to finish. Somewhere outside the window, through the noise of the wind, came a strange sound, thin, plaintive, almost indistinguishable. Chloe froze, listening, and her pencil fell from her hand. "Mom, did you hear that?" she whispered, looking at her mother with wide eyes. Sarah frowned, placing her mug on the table. Adam also turned his head toward the window, but said nothing. The wind howled louder, and the sound nearly dissolved in its roar. But a few seconds later, it repeated, a weak but insistent meow. "It's a cat!" Chloe jumped up, her voice trembling with excitement. "Mom, someone is crying!" Sarah looked at Adam, who had already risen from his chair. His face showed slight annoyance. He didn't want to leave the warmth in this weather. "You imagined it, probably," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Who would be out there in a blizzard like this?" Chloe ran to the window, pressing her nose against the cold glass, trying to peer into the darkness. But the snow had plastered everything, and visibility was nearly zero. "Dad, please check," she pleaded. "What if someone is freezing out there?" Adam sighed, but headed for the front door. Sarah followed him, wrapping a warm shawl around her shoulders. Her heart was already beating faster. Something in that sound, so weak and desperate, put her on edge. She knew how cruel a winter night could be, especially here, in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. Adam put on his coat, grabbed a flashlight from the shelf by the door, and turned the key in the lock. Cold air rushed into the entryway, bringing with it the smell of snow and ice. He flipped on the porch light, and the flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a vortex of snowflakes. Sarah and Chloe stood behind him, holding their breath. "Well, what is it?" Sarah quietly asked, trying to see over her husband's shoulder. Adam squinted, peering into the gloom. And suddenly, he stopped cold. Right at the doorstep, directly on the wooden steps, sat a small gray cat. Its fur was covered in snow, its whiskers were frosty, and its body was shaking so violently that it looked like it might collapse at any moment. The cat lifted its head, and its large, round eyes, like two green embers, looked directly at Adam. It let out a soft, pitiful meow, yet with such hope that the man caught his breath. "Lord, where did you come from?" Adam breathed out, lowering the flashlight. The cat made a weak attempt to step forward, but its legs gave out and it merely pressed itself against the step, continuing to tremble. Its gaze did not leave the people, as if it were begging them not to close the door. Chloe squeezed past, her eyes already shining with tears. "Dad, he's frozen. We can't leave him." Sarah placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her own heart tightening with pity. She looked at her husband, and her gaze left no room for argument. "Adam," she said quietly, "we can't do that. He won't survive the night." Adam shook his head, but the certainty was gone from his movements. He looked at the cat, at its wet, matted fur, at its trembling paws, and something inside him gave way. He knew that taking in a stray animal was a risk: illness, fleas, and simply the unknown. Who knew where this cat came from and what it carried with it? But that look, full of desperate plea, was stronger than all caution. "Fine," he finally exhaled, stepping aside. "Come on in, you little vagrant." He opened the door wider, and the cat, as if that were all it had been waiting for, slowly but purposefully slipped inside. Its paws left wet tracks on the wooden floor, and its body was still shaking. Sarah immediately rushed to the closet for an old towel, and Chloe, forgetting her drawing, ran to the kitchen for a bowl of water. The fireplace still crackled, but now the house held not only warmth, but also the feeling that this evening had marked the beginning of something new. The cat, small and exhausted, brought with it not only the cold from outside, but also a mystery that the Millers had yet to solve. And outside the windows, the blizzard continued to howl, as if mourning those who remained in its icy embrace. The cat, having just been let in by Adam, vanished somewhere in the shadow of the entryway, leaving behind only wet footprints on the floor. Sarah still held the towel she had been using to dry its fur, and Chloe stood by the door, peering into the darkness as if expecting someone else to appear. "Dad, is he going to run away?" Chloe asked. Her voice trembled with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. She still clutched the bowl of water she hadn't managed to place before the cat. Adam closed the front door, sliding the bolt shut with a heavy metallic clang. The cold air that had rushed into the house was still palpable in the entryway, and he rubbed his hands to warm up. "Where would he run in this weather?" he replied, but his tone lacked his usual confidence. He glanced at Sarah, who was already heading towards the fireplace to hang the towel to dry. "Sarah, are you sure this was a good idea? A stray cat? You never know." Sarah turned around. Her eyebrows were slightly raised. She was accustomed to her husband's caution, his habit of weighing every step. But now a genuine determination flashed in her eyes. "Adam, he would have frozen. Did you see his eyes? He's not just a cat." She hesitated, searching for words. "He's a living creature asking for help. We couldn't leave him." Chloe, still standing by the door, suddenly froze. Her small body tensed, and her head tilted slightly as if catching a sound. The house fell silent. Only the crackling of wood in the fireplace broke the stillness, and then, through the wind's howl, the meowing came again, thin, plaintive, almost human. It came from somewhere in the corner of the entryway, where shadows gathered by the old wooden chest. "Mom, he's crying!" Chloe exclaimed, dropping the bowl on the floor and running toward the sound. Water splashed onto the floorboards, but the girl didn't even notice. Her pigtails bounced as she ran toward the chest, her movements a mix of childish determination and sincere compassion. Sarah hurried after her daughter, and Adam, sighing, followed them. He still didn't trust this cat, but Chloe's curiosity and worry made him move. In the corner of the entryway behind the chest they saw him. The gray cat, still trembling, was pressed against the wall. His green eyes shone in the semi-darkness, and his whiskers twitched with every weak sound he made. The meowing was more than just pitiful. It carried a deep sorrow, as if the cat wasn't just begging for food or warmth, but was searching for something more. "The poor thing," Chloe whispered, kneeling down. She reached out her hand, but the cat instinctively shrank away, pinning its ears back against its head. Its gaze darted from the girl to the adults, and there was something in it that made Sarah pause. It wasn't fear nor aggression. It was wariness mixed with hope, as if the cat was assessing whether these people could be trusted. "Chloe, don't rush him," Sarah said quietly, sitting down next to her daughter. She held out the towel she was still carrying and spoke softly to the cat. "There, little guy, come here. We won't hurt you." Adam stood a little way off, arms crossed over his chest. His face showed a mixture of skepticism and concern. He wasn't opposed to animals. He'd had a dog as a boy, but something about this cat put him on edge. Maybe it was the way it had appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a brutal blizzard, or the way it looked at them, as if it understood more than a typical animal should. "Where did he even come from?" Adam muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The nearest town is miles away, and in this weather even the farm dogs aren't running around." Sarah, without taking her eyes off the cat, replied, "Maybe he ran away from someone or got lost. Either way, he's here, and we can't kick him out." The cat, as if hearing her words, took a cautious step forward. Its paws were still trembling, but it slowly moved toward Sarah, sniffed the edge of the towel, and let out another meow. no longer as desperate, but still full of longing. Chloe couldn't help herself, reaching out to pet him, but Sarah gently stopped her. "Give him time, sweetheart. He's scared. Imagine what it's like to be alone in a storm like this." Chloe nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She was a sensitive child, and every story about abandoned animals or lost people touched her deeply. Sarah knew this and always tried to teach her daughter compassion while keeping her emotions in check. Now, looking at the cat, she felt her own heart clench. This small creature, so fragile and tormented, brought back memories of her own childhood when she once found an abandoned kitten in her apartment building and hid it from her parents in her room. "Dad, can we give him something to eat?" Chloe asked, turning to Adam. Her voice was full of hope, and the man couldn't resist that look. "All right," he nodded, softening. "But don't feed him table scraps. Find something appropriate and no leftovers, understood?" Sarah smiled, getting up from her knees. She took Chloe's hand and led her to the kitchen. The cat, sensing that the danger had passed, slowly followed them, keeping its distance. Its movements were cautious, almost stealthy, as if it was used to being unnoticed. Adam watched it go, and a thought flashed through his mind. This cat isn't like a common stray. There was something too deliberate about its mannerisms. In the kitchen, Sarah opened the refrigerator, searching for something suitable. She took out a piece of cooked chicken left over from dinner and sliced off a few thin pieces. Meanwhile, Chloe poured milk into a small bowl, the one they usually used for sauces. The cat stopped at the kitchen entrance, not stepping inside. Its eyes followed Sarah's every movement, but it didn't rush to approach. "Go on, come here," Sarah called, placing the bowl on the floor. She moved back so as not to scare the cat and gestured for Chloe to do the same. The girl obediently retreated, though she clearly wanted to get closer. The cat took a few cautious steps, sniffing the air. Its nose twitched, catching the scent of food, and a moment later it began to eat, slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food would disappear. Sarah watched it, her heart aching with pity. She noticed how thin its sides were, how its ribs showed beneath the wet fur. This cat clearly hadn't eaten properly in a long time. "Poor guy," she whispered, glancing at her husband, who was still standing in the kitchen doorway. "How long do you think he was wandering?" Adam didn't reply, but his gaze softened. He still wasn't sure if they had done the right thing by letting a strange animal in. But the sight of this small creature greedily lapping up the milk made him feel something akin to compassion. He remembered how, as a boy, he had once rescued a puppy that had fallen into a ditch. He had had doubts then, too, but that puppy had become his best friend for several years. "Dad, what should we name him?" Chloe asked, not taking her eyes off the cat. "He needs a name, right?" Adam hummed, trying to hide a smile. "How should I know? He didn't come with a tag." Sarah laughed, and the sound broke the tension that still hung in the air. She looked at the cat, which had finished eating and was now grooming its whiskers while sitting on the floor. Its eyes were still wary, but something new had appeared in them, a subtle calmness, as if it was beginning to understand that it wouldn't be harmed here. "Let's not rush the name yet," Sarah said, addressing her daughter. "Let him get used to us first, and tomorrow we'll see what to do." Chloe nodded, but it was clear she was already mentally listing names. She had always dreamed of a pet, but Adam was against it. Too much trouble, and in the city where they lived most of the year, keeping a pet was complicated. This cat, unexpectedly appearing in their lives, seemed like a true gift from fate. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but inside the house, it was warm and quiet. The cat, having finished its meal, slowly walked toward the fireplace and curled up on the old rug lying by the hearth. Its breathing became steady. The shaking gradually subsided. Sarah, Chloe, and Adam looked at him, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah wondered how strange it was that this cat had chosen their house. Chloe dreamed about how wonderful it would be to keep him forever. And Adam reflected that this evening, which had started so cozily, was now full of unanswered questions. Somewhere deep in the house, the clock chimed 10. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, and the night promised to be long. The cat, lying by the fireplace, closed its eyes, but its ears still twitched, listening to every sound. It was safe, but something in its demeanor suggested he's still waiting for something or someone that the Millers had no clue about yet. Adam, still not fully reconciled to the cat's presence, paced the room, alternately adjusting the logs in the fireplace and glancing at the door, as if expecting new surprises. "I should check if he tracked in too much snow," he said, finally stopping at the entryway. His voice sounded more like an attempt to distract himself from his own thoughts than a real concern for cleanliness. Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was still thinking about how the cat had ended up on their doorstep. In such a storm, in such a remote place. It was almost a miracle, but a miracle tinged with worry. Chloe, without taking her eyes off the cat, quietly asked, "Mom, is he going to stay with us, at least for the night?" Sarah looked at her daughter. Her face softened. She wanted to say something encouraging, but she didn't get the chance. From the entryway came a sound again, the same plaintive meow they had heard before, but now it was closer, more insistent. The cat, lying by the fireplace, raised its head. Its green eyes flashed, reflecting the flames. It didn't move from its spot, but its body tensed, as if preparing for something. "It's him again," Adam mumbled, heading for the door. "Why won't he just stay put?" Sarah stood up. Her movements were quick but cautious, as if she was afraid of startling something important. Chloe, unable to stop herself, jumped off the sofa and ran after her father. Her bare feet slapped against the wooden floor. Adam stopped at the front door, put his hand on the bolt, but didn't rush to open it. He listened. The wind outside roared, but through its drone the same sound pierced through again, thin, desperate, almost begging. "Dad, open it!" Chloe pulled at his sleeve. Her eyes were full of impatience. "What if there's another kitty? Or maybe he forgot something?" Adam shook his head, but finally turned the key. Cold air burst into the house, bringing with it the smell of snow and frost. He turned on the porch light, and the beam of light picked out a whirl of snowflakes, circling in a wild dance from the darkness. On the steps, where the cat had recently sat, there was no one. Adam frowned, sweeping the flashlight beam around, but he saw nothing but snow and darkness. "No one," he said, turning back to Sarah and Chloe. "It must have been the wind playing tricks." But Chloe wouldn't give up. She squeezed forward, standing on tiptoe to peer further out. "No, Dad, I heard him. It was definitely him." Sarah, standing behind her daughter, suddenly noticed something in the corner of the porch, where the wooden railing met the wall. She touched Adam's shoulder and pointed. He directed the flashlight, and in the beam of light, the cat appeared again. The very one they had let in. He was sitting, pressed against the wall, looking at them. His fur was covered with a fresh layer of snow, and his eyes glistened like two emeralds full of pleading. He meowed, and the sound was so piercing that shivers ran down Sarah's spine. "Good heavens! How did he get back outside?" Adam exhaled. His voice trembled with surprise. He was certain the cat had stayed inside by the fireplace. "I let him in." Sarah stepped forward, her heart clenching with a fresh wave of pity. She didn't understand how the cat could have gotten out, but it didn't matter now. He was shaking, his legs could barely hold him, and it seemed that in another moment he would simply freeze to death. "Adam, he's freezing again," she said quietly but firmly. "We have to bring him in." Chloe was already tugging at her father's arm, her voice shaking. "Dad, please, it's not his fault." Adam, still perplexed, opened the door wider. The cat, as if only waiting for this, took a few hesitant steps and slipped into the house. This time he didn't run to the corner, but stopped right in the entryway, looking at the people. His gaze was not just pleading, it had a strange depth, as if he was trying to communicate something. Sarah crouched down, reaching out a hand toward him. She didn't try to touch him, just wanted to show him he was safe. The cat looked at her, then slowly approached and nudged his cold nose into her palm. It was his first touch, and Sarah felt warmth spread through her body, despite the icy air still lingering in the entryway. "There you go, little one," she whispered. "You're home now." Chloe, standing nearby, clapped her hands with delight, but quickly covered her mouth so as not to startle the cat. Adam closed the door, sliding the bolt shut with such force that it felt like he was cutting off the entire blizzard at once. He looked at the cat, then at his wife and daughter, and a mix of exasperation and affection flickered in his eyes. "Fine, but this is the last time," he said, though everyone in the room knew he had already surrendered. "If he slips out again, I'm not going looking for him." Sarah smiled, but her mind was preoccupied. She couldn't understand how the cat had gotten outside again. The door was locked, the windows closed. There were no cracks in the house through which he could have escaped. It was strange, almost inexplicable, and this mystery settled a subtle uneasiness in her heart. But she pushed those thoughts away, deciding the main thing was that the cat was warm now. "Chloe, bring another towel," she requested, standing up, "and a fresh bowl of water. He looks completely soaked." The girl nodded and ran to the bathroom. Her steps echoed on the wooden floor. The cat, meanwhile, slowly moved toward the fireplace, but stopped halfway, as if pondering. He turned, looked at Sarah, then at Adam, and something in his gaze made both of them stop. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more, almost human. "He's a strange one," Adam muttered when the cat finally settled by the fireplace, curling up in a ball. "He's not scared, but he doesn't want to cuddle either. It's like he's testing us." Sarah nodded, but didn't say anything. She was watching the cat, and questions spun in her head. Where did he come from? Why did he come to them? And how, for heaven's sake, did he get out of a locked house? But most of all, she was worried about something else. This cat, so small and tormented, seemed like more than just an animal. There was something in its eyes that she couldn't explain, but which made her heart beat faster. Chloe returned with a towel and a bowl of water, placing them next to the cat. He sniffed them but didn't drink, only licked the water a couple of times and closed his eyes again. His breathing was steady, but Sarah noticed he hadn't fully relaxed. His ears still twitched, and his tail occasionally flickered, as if listening to something outside the house. "Dad, can we give him a name?" Chloe asked, sitting on the floor next to the cat. "Like Snowball or Blizzard?" Adam hummed, but this time his voice held more warmth than skepticism. "Hold on, honey. First, we need to figure out whose cat he is. Maybe he already has a name? And an owner." Sarah looked at her husband, her gaze turning serious. She didn't want to think that the cat might have an owner. Not now, when he was just starting to trust them. But she knew Adam was right. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out where this guest came from and what to do with him next. Outside, the blizzard grew louder, and the house seemed to tremble under its assault. The fireplace crackled, casting shadows on the walls. And in those shadows, the cat looked even more mysterious. Sarah, Chloe, and Adam sat in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. They didn't know that this cat brought with it not only the mystery of its arrival, but also a story that would soon turn their understanding of compassion and loyalty upside down. The blizzard outside the windows did not subside, but its howl became a backdrop that the Millers were beginning to get used to. The house was warm, but a new sensation lingered in the air, a subtle tension brought by the small gray cat. He lay by the fireplace, curled up in a ball, and his breathing was even, but his ears still twitched, as if listening to something beyond the walls. Sarah sat on the sofa, gazing thoughtfully at the fire. Her hands still held the residual warmth from touching the cat's cold fur. Chloe nestled close by, hugging a pillow and keeping her eyes fixed on the new guest. Adam, standing by the window, looked into the darkness where the snow spun in an endless dance. His face was stern, but a shadow of doubt, which he tried to conceal, flickered in his eyes. "So, what are we going to do with him?" Adam finally broke the silence, turning to his wife. His voice was low, with a hint of irritation, but underneath it lay uncertainty. He was used to solving problems quickly and clearly, but this cat, appearing out of nowhere, threw him off balance. "We can't just keep him. He's a strange animal, and we don't know who he belongs to. What if he's sick or has fleas?" Sarah raised her head. Her gaze was calm but firm. She knew her husband's tone. He always started with objections when faced with something unexpected, but she also knew that a kind heart, which just needed time to accept the decision, hid beneath his grumbling. "Adam, he doesn't look sick," she replied, trying to speak softly so as not to provoke an argument. "He's thin, sure, but clean. And his eyes are clear. Fleas? Well, we'll check that later. The main thing is that he's warm now. You saw how he was shaking. Leaving him out there would have been wrong." Chloe, hearing her father's words, jumped up from the sofa. Her pigtails bounced and her voice trembled with emotion. "Dad, he'll die in the cold," she exclaimed, tears welling up in her eyes. "You let him in yourself. That means you don't want him to freeze either." Adam looked at his daughter, and his face softened. Chloe always knew how to find his weak spot. He sighed, ran a hand through his short hair, and shook his head. "Chloe, I'm not saying we should kick him out, but think about it. He's not our cat. He might have an owner, or he ran away, or—" He hesitated, not wanting to frighten his daughter. "Or something else. We need to figure it out." Sarah stood up, approached the fireplace, and looked at the cat. He slightly opened one eye as if sensing her gaze, but didn't move. His fur was almost dry now, and in the firelight it shimmered silver, as if dusted with frost. Sarah noticed how neatly he lay, not spreading out his paws or taking up extra space, as if trying to be inconspicuous. It touched her. There was a reserved gratitude in his behavior that she couldn't explain. "Adam," she said quietly, without taking her eyes off the cat. "You can't leave an animal out in a blizzard. You know that yourself." "Let's at least let him sleep here for the night, and tomorrow we'll decide what to do. Maybe we'll post a notice or ask around the neighborhood." Chloe immediately chimed in. "Yes, Mom, let's ask. But he's so good. Look." She pointed at the cat, who, as if in response to her words, slowly stretched and yawned, revealing small white teeth. It was his first movement that didn't betray tension. Chloe beamed. "See? He's getting used to it." Adam hummed, but the corners of his mouth twitched into a small smile. He walked over to the fireplace, crouched down, and looked closely at the cat. The cat met his gaze, and for a moment Adam thought he saw something human flash in those green eyes. Not fear, not wariness, but something like understanding. It slightly puzzled him, but he dismissed the thought. "All right," he finally said, getting up. "He can stay for the night, but first thing tomorrow I'm going to check if he has a collar or anything, and I'll go into the neighborhood, see if anyone's looking for a lost pet." Sarah nodded, her face illuminated by a soft smile. She knew Adam was already beginning to give in, even if he wouldn't admit it. Chloe, unable to contain her joy, clapped her hands and ran toward the cat, but stopped a step away, remembering her mother's words about not scaring him. "What's he going to eat?" she asked, turning to her parents. "He drank the milk, but he probably wants something else." Sarah thought for a moment, and her gaze scanned the kitchen where the bowl with leftover chicken still sat. She understood the cat needed something more substantial, but at the same time she didn't want to overfeed him after a long period of hunger. She remembered her grandmother teaching her that animals that hadn't eaten in a long time should be fed sparingly to avoid harming them. "Let's give him a little more chicken," she suggested, "and some water. And tomorrow we'll buy something suitable at the pet store. There's one in town." Chloe nodded, her eyes burning with enthusiasm. She was already imagining how she would take care of the cat, how she would play with him, and maybe even make him a bed out of old blankets. Adam, noticing her excitement, shook his head but said nothing. He knew his daughter was already attached to this animal, and it worried him. What if the cat really belongs to someone, or if he has to be given away? He didn't want Chloe to cry, but he wasn't going to keep a strange animal without knowing the facts. The cat, as if sensing he was being discussed, lifted his head and looked at the family. His gaze was calm, but wariness still lingered in it. He slowly stood up, stretched, and his paws softly patted onto the rug. He walked over to the bowl of water Chloe had placed nearby and began to drink, carefully, without spilling a drop. Sarah watched him, and her heart tightened with a strange feeling. This cat did not behave like a stray accustomed to the streets. There was a certain refinement in his movements, an almost aristocratic restraint, that didn't match his emaciated appearance. "Look how he drinks," Sarah quietly said, addressing Adam. "As if he was taught. Maybe he really does belong to someone." Adam nodded, but his thoughts were on something else. He still couldn't figure out how the cat got outside after they let him in. He had checked the entryway, the door, the windows, even looked under the chest, but found no gaps or passages. It annoyed him. He hated mysteries without answers. But now, looking at the cat peacefully drinking water, he decided to postpone those thoughts until morning. "All right," he said, returning to the fireplace. "He can sleep here, but if he starts causing trouble, I'm putting him in the garage." Chloe indignantly tossed her head, but Sarah stopped her with a gesture before she could say anything. "Adam, he won't cause trouble," she said with a faint smile. "Look at him. He just wants warmth." The cat, as if to confirm her words, finished drinking and returned to its spot by the fireplace. He lay down, neatly tucking his paws, and closed his eyes. But his ears still twitched, and his tail slightly moved, as if he hadn't completely relaxed. Sarah looked at him, and a thought flashed through her mind. This cat isn't just seeking shelter. He's looking for something else, something important. But what? Sarah sat on the sofa, thoughtfully fiddling with the edge of her shawl, while Chloe, sitting on the floor, watched the cat with rapt eyes. Adam, still slightly wary, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, observing the scene, as if expecting the cat to reveal its secret at any moment. "Dad, can I make him a bed?" Chloe asked. Her voice was full of enthusiasm, but she tried to speak quietly so as not to startle the cat. We have old pillows in the storage closet, right? Adam raised an eyebrow, but his face softened. He was already used to how quickly his daughter attached to new ideas, especially when they involved caring for someone. "A bed?" he repeated, trying to hide a smile. "You've already claimed him as your own? What if he runs away tomorrow, or his owner is found?" Chloe frowned. Her small fists clenched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked at her mother for support. Sarah smiled, putting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Let's make one, Chloe," she said softly. "It will make him more comfortable. Just don't use anything new, okay? Take those pillows from the cedar chest." Chloe beamed and immediately jumped up. Her bare feet pattered on the wooden floor as she ran to the closet. Sarah watched her go, and her heart tightened with tenderness. She knew how much her daughter dreamed of a pet, and this cat, so fragile and mysterious, had already become something more than just a random guest for her. But Sarah couldn't shake off the slight unease. What if this cat truly belongs to someone? And what if they have to give him back? Adam, as if reading her thoughts, stepped closer and quietly said, "Sarah, I'm serious. Tomorrow, we need to find out where he came from. I don't want Chloe to get attached and then cry if he's taken away." Sarah nodded, but her gaze returned to the cat. He slowly lifted his head, as if sensing he was being talked about, and looked at her. His green eyes were so deep that Sarah felt a momentary chill, as if the cat could see right through her. She shook off the thought and stood up to fetch another towel. The first one was already hanging by the fireplace, giving off a faint smell of damp fur. "I understand," she replied to Adam, trying to speak calmly. "But right now, he's here, and he needs help. Look how thin he is. He probably hasn't eaten properly in a week." The cat, as if confirming her words, slowly got up and walked over to the bowl of water that Chloe had left nearby. He licked it a few times, but without greed, as if he knew there was no need to rush. His movements were so smooth and careful that Sarah involuntarily wondered, "This cat is clearly not used to street life." There was something domestic, almost refined, in his mannerisms, despite his exhaustion. Chloe returned, dragging 2 old pillows in faded pillowcases behind her. She proudly placed them by the fireplace, carefully smoothing them out to create a cozy nest. The cat looked at her efforts, tilting his head slightly, and Sarah couldn't help but smile. There was something almost comical in the gesture, as if he were evaluating her work. "There, look at this bed," Chloe proudly announced, stepping back and admiring her creation. "Now you'll be comfortable." The cat took a few cautious steps, sniffed the pillows, and, as if deciding they were worthy of him, lay down, neatly tucking his paws. He closed his eyes, but his ears still twitched, catching every little sound. Sarah watched him, and her heart again tightened with a strange feeling. This cat was not just an animal in distress. There was something about him that made her feel responsibility, almost a duty. Adam, noticing her thoughtful gaze, stepped closer and put a hand on her shoulder. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Lost in your thoughts again?" Sarah shook her head, but her smile was a little strained. "It's all just strange. He came to us, chose our house. And how did he get back outside? I keep thinking, maybe it's some kind of sign." Adam hummed, but there was no mockery in his voice, only a slight weariness. "A sign? Sarah, it's just a cat, a hungry frozen cat. Don't go making things up." But Sarah wasn't so sure. She looked at the cat, who now seemed slightly more relaxed, and remembered her grandmother saying that animals sometimes come to people for more than just simple reasons. They bring stories, destinies, and sometimes even warnings. Sarah wasn't superstitious, but now, looking at this cat, she felt that his presence on their doorstep was no accident. Chloe, meanwhile, couldn't sit still. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed another piece of chicken, and carefully placed it on a saucer next to the cat. He partially opened his eyes, sniffed the food, but didn't eat, only licked it and closed his eyes again. Chloe frowned, her face serious. "Mom, he's not eating. Maybe he doesn't like chicken?" she asked, turning to Sarah. "No, sweetie, he's just tired," Sarah replied, sitting down next to her daughter. "He needs time. He was probably out in the cold for a long time, and you don't eat much right after something like that." Chloe nodded, but her gaze was still full of worry. She looked at the cat, then at her parents, and a determination flashed in her eyes. "I'll keep watch over him," she announced. "If he wakes up in the night, I'll give him water or something else." Adam laughed, but his laughter held more warmth than skepticism. "Keep watch? You'll be asleep in half an hour, kiddo," he said, patting his daughter on the head. "Let's go to bed. We'll sort it out tomorrow." But Chloe didn't want to leave. She settled on the floor, closer to the fireplace, and looked at the cat as if afraid he would vanish if she turned away. Sarah looked at her husband, and they exchanged understanding glances. They both knew that this night had changed something in their house, even if they couldn't yet grasp what. The cat, lying on the pillows, suddenly made a quiet sound. Not a meow, but something like a purr, very faint, almost inaudible. Sarah froze, listening. It was the first time he had shown anything other than wariness or sorrow. She felt warmth spread through her body, as if that sound was meant just for her. "Did you hear that?" Chloe whispered. Her eyes lit up. "He's purring. That means he's happy." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She remembered how, as a child, her old orange cat, Murzik, would purr when she stroked him after a long day. That sound had been like a promise to her that everything would be all right. And now, listening to the faint purring of this cat, she felt the same thing, hope mixed with anxiety. Adam, noticing her thoughtfulness, decided to lighten the mood. "All right, enough staring at him," he said, winking at Chloe. "Time for bed, or you'll be a zombie tomorrow." Chloe giggled, but obediently stood up, giving the cat one last look. Sarah also rose, but before leaving, she looked at their new guest one more time. His eyes were closed, but she was sure he wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, but the house was quiet. Only the crackling of wood broke the silence. The cat was sleeping, but his light sleep was full of expectations that the Millers couldn't yet understand. The night promised to be long, and the morning full of new discoveries. Adam, sitting in the chair, flipped through an old magazine, but his eyes kept drifting to the new guest as if he was trying to decipher his secret. "Chloe, it's time for bed," he finally said, putting the magazine down. His voice was firm, but there was fatigue in it. "Tomorrow will be a busy day if we decide to figure out this cat." Chloe frowned, her lips set in a stubborn crease. She looked at the cat, who lay motionless, and her face softened. "Dad, what if he wakes up in the night and gets scared?" she asked quietly. "He doesn't know where he is. I want to stay so he won't be afraid." Sarah smiled, but there was a shadow of worry in her expression. She understood that her daughter was already attached to the cat, and that feeling grew with every minute. She felt something similar herself, an inexplicable pull toward this small creature who had chosen their house in such a storm. But she was worried about more than that. Questions spun in her head. How did the cat get outside? Why did he come back? And what was that sorrow in his eyes when he looked at them? "Chloe, "He won't be scared," Sarah said, trying to speak calmly. "We made him a bed, gave him food and water. He knows it's safe here, but you really need to sleep. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." Chloe sighed, but obediently stood up, casting one last glance at the cat. She approached him, leaned down, and whispered, "Good night, kitty. Don't be afraid. We're here with you." The cat opened one eye, looked at her, and Sarah thought she saw gratitude flicker in its gaze. It was strange. Cats weren't supposed to look like that. But this cat was special. She dismissed the thought and stood up to walk her daughter to the bedroom. "Let's go, sweetie," she said, taking Chloe's hand. "Or Dad's right, you'll be a sleepyhead tomorrow." Adam hummed but said nothing. He watched Sarah lead Chloe away, and his gaze returned to the cat. He lay quietly, but his ears still twitched, and his tail slightly moved as if listening to something outside the house. Adam shook his head, trying to get rid of the strange feeling that wouldn't leave him alone. This cat was too knowing, too unlike a common stray. When Sarah returned, she brought another bowl from the kitchen. This time it held pieces of deli ham that she had carefully sliced. She placed it next to the cat, but he only sniffed it and closed his eyes again. Sarah frowned, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of her sleeve. "He's hardly eating," she said, looking at Adam. "Is that normal? Maybe he really is sick?" Adam shrugged, but his face grew more serious. "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe he's just tired or frightened. Tomorrow we'll take him to the vet if we can find one in the area, and we'll figure it out then." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered her grandmother teaching her that animals that come to people in distress often carry something more than just hunger or cold. She didn't believe in omens, but now, looking at the cat, she felt that he wasn't just a random visitor. His appearance was like a message that she couldn't yet decipher. The cat suddenly lifted its head. Its eyes gleamed in the firelight. He slowly stood up, stretched, and his paws softly stepped on the pillows. He circled the bed as if checking its sturdiness, and then began to explore the room. His movements were cautious, almost stealthy, but there was no fear in them, only curiosity mixed with wariness. He sniffed the corner of the sofa, walked along the wall where the bookshelf stood, and stopped at the window. His gaze was fixed on the darkness, where the snow spun in an endless vortex. "Look," Adam quietly said, pointing at the cat. "It's like he's looking for something." Sarah nodded, her heart clenching. She went to the window, but saw nothing but darkness and snow. The cat stood still, his ears aimed forward and his tail slightly twitching. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What was he seeing out there, or who? "Maybe he's just getting his bearings," she said, trying to reassure herself. "He needs time to adjust." But the cat suddenly made a quiet sound, not a meow, but something between a sigh and a purr. He turned and looked at Sarah, and something in his eyes made her freeze. It wasn't sorrow nor gratitude. It was something deeper, almost human. Sarah felt her throat tighten, and she turned away to hide her emotions. Adam, noticing her reaction, stepped closer. "Sarah, are you all right?" he asked. His voice was full of concern. "You're not yourself." Sarah shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. It's just, he's so strange, like he knows more than we do." Adam hummed, but didn't argue. He felt himself that this cat was different. He remembered the dog from his childhood, who always knew when he was sad, and would lie down beside him to comfort him. This cat was different, but there was something similar in its behavior, a kind of knowing care that he couldn't yet grasp. The cat, meanwhile, returned to his bed, circled it once more, and lay down, neatly tucking his paws. He closed his eyes, but his ears still twitched and his tail slightly moved. Sarah looked at him, and her thoughts were muddled. She remembered finding kittens in her apartment building as a child and bringing them home despite her parents' protests. Then she had felt like a hero, saving small lives. Now that feeling returned, but with it came something new. The sense that this cat was not only saving himself, but saving them, too. "Let's go to sleep," Adam said, interrupting her thoughts. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. Maybe he's just a stray and we're overthinking things." Sarah nodded, but her gaze was still glued to the cat. She went to the fireplace, tossed in one more log so the fire wouldn't go out by morning, and quietly said, "Good night, little one. We'll find out everything tomorrow." The cat didn't move, but his ears slightly twitched, as if he had heard her words. Sarah felt warmth spread through her body, as if this cat had already become a part of their home. She turned to Adam, and together they walked to the bedroom, leaving the cat by the fireplace. But before leaving the room, Sarah turned back and looked at him one last time. His eyes were closed, but she was sure he wasn't asleep. He was waiting. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, but the house was quiet. Only the crackling of wood broke the silence. The cat lay motionless, but his light sleep was full of expectations that the Millers couldn't yet understand. The night promised to be long, and the morning full of new discoveries. Adam, sitting in the chair, flipped through an old magazine, but his eyes kept drifting to the new guest, as if he was trying to unravel his mystery. "Chloe, time for bed," he finally said, putting the magazine down. His voice was firm, but he sounded tired. "Tomorrow will be a tough day if we decide to figure out this cat." Chloe frowned, her lips set in a stubborn line. She looked at the cat, who lay motionless, and her face softened. "Dad, what if he wakes up in the night and gets scared?" she asked quietly. "He doesn't know where he is. I want to stay so he won't be afraid." Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of anxiety in her smile. She understood that her daughter was already attached to the cat and that feeling was growing with every minute. She felt something similar herself, an inexplicable pull toward this small creature who had chosen their house in such a storm. But she was worried about more than that. Questions spun in her head. How did the cat get outside? Why did he come back? And what was that sorrow in his eyes when he looked at them? "Chloe, he won't be scared," Sarah said, trying to speak calmly. "We made him a bed, gave him food and water. He knows it's safe here, but you really have to sleep. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." Chloe sighed, but obediently stood up, giving the cat one last look. She walked up to him, leaned down and whispered, "Good night, kitty. Don't be afraid. We're with you." The cat opened one eye, looked at her, and Sarah thought she saw gratitude flicker in his gaze. It was strange. Cats weren't supposed to look like that. But this cat was special. She dismissed the thought and stood up to walk her daughter to the bedroom. "Come on, sweetie," she said, taking Chloe's hand. "Or Dad's right, you'll be a sleepy fly tomorrow." Adam hummed, but said nothing. He watched Sarah lead Chloe away, and his gaze returned to the cat. He lay quietly, but his ears still twitched, and his tail slightly moved, as if listening to something outside the house. Adam shook his head, trying to get rid of the strange feeling that wouldn't leave him alone. This cat was too knowing, too unlike a common stray. When Sarah returned, she brought another bowl from the kitchen. This time it held pieces of ham that she had carefully sliced. She placed it next to the cat, but he only sniffed it and closed his eyes again. Sarah frowned, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of her sleeve. "He's hardly eating," she said, looking at Adam. "Is that normal? Maybe he's sick, after all?" Adam shrugged, but his face grew more serious. "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe he's just tired or too frightened. Tomorrow we'll take him to a vet if we can find one in the area, and we'll sort it out then." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered her grandmother teaching her that animals that come to people in distress often carry something more than just hunger or cold. She didn't believe in superstitions, but now, looking at the cat, she felt that he wasn't just a random visitor. His appearance was like a message that she couldn't yet decipher. The cat suddenly lifted its head. Its eyes shone in the firelight. He slowly stood up, stretched, and his paws softly stepped onto the pillows. He circled the bed, as if testing its durability, and then began to explore the room. His movements were cautious, almost stealthy, but there was no fear in them, only curiosity mixed with wariness. He sniffed the corner of the sofa, walked along the wall where the bookshelf stood, and stopped at the window. His gaze was fixed on the darkness, where the snow spun in an endless vortex. "Look," Adam quietly said, pointing at the cat. "It's like he's searching for something." Sarah nodded, her heart clenching. She went to the window, but saw nothing but darkness and snow. The cat stood still, his ears pointed forward, and his tail slightly twitched. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. What was he seeing out there, or who? "Maybe he's just getting used to the place," she said, trying to reassure herself. "He needs time to adjust." But the cat suddenly made a quiet sound. Not a meow, but something between a sigh and a purr. He turned and looked at Sarah, and something in his eyes made her freeze. It wasn't sorrow nor gratitude. It was something deeper, almost human. Sarah felt her throat tighten, and she turned away to hide her emotions. Adam, noticing her reaction, stepped closer. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked. His voice was full of concern. "You seem unsettled." Sarah shook her head, forcing herself to smile. "It's fine. He's just so strange, like he knows more than we think." Adam hummed but didn't argue. He felt himself that this cat was different. He recalled the dog of his childhood, who always knew when he was sad and would lie down beside him to comfort him. This cat was different, but there was something similar in its behavior, a kind of knowing attentiveness that he couldn't yet grasp. The cat, meanwhile, returned to his bed, circled it once more, and lay down, neatly tucking his paws. He closed his eyes, but his ears still twitched, and his tail slightly moved. Sarah looked at him, and her thoughts were confused. She remembered finding kittens in the apartment building as a child and bringing them home despite her parents' protests. Then she had felt like a hero, saving small lives. Now that feeling returned, but with it came something new, the sense that this cat was not just saving himself, but saving them, too. "Let's go to bed," Adam said, interrupting her thoughts. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. Maybe he's just a stray, and we just imagined things." Sarah nodded, but her gaze was still fixed on the cat. She went to the fireplace, tossed in one more log so the fire wouldn't go out by morning, and quietly said, "Good night, little one. We'll find out everything tomorrow." The cat didn't move, but his ears slightly twitched, as if he had heard her words. Sarah felt warmth spread through her body, as if this cat had already become a part of their home. She turned to Adam, and together they walked to the bedroom, leaving the cat by the fireplace. But before leaving the room, Sarah turned back and looked at him one last time. His eyes were closed, but she was sure he wasn't asleep. He was waiting. Outside, The blizzard continued to howl, but the house was quiet. Only the crackling of wood broke the silence. The cat lay motionless, but his light sleep was full of expectations. The night promised to be long, and the morning full of new discoveries that were already beginning to emerge in the shadows cast by the fireplace. Sarah woke up first. She lay in bed, looking at the ceiling where the shadows from the curtains drew intricate patterns. Her thoughts were consumed by the cat, his appearance, his strange behavior, his eyes, in which there was something more than just animal sorrow. She got up, put on a warm robe, and quietly left the bedroom, trying not to wake Adam. His even breathing came from under the covers, and Sarah smiled. He always slept soundly, as if the whole world could wait until morning. In the living room, she stopped. Her gaze immediately found the cat. He was lying on the pillows, but his posture was slightly different. He was stretched out, one paw tucked beneath him, and he looked almost peaceful. Sarah walked closer, crouched down, and looked at him carefully. His fur, in the morning light, looked even more silvery, and faint dark stripes, which she hadn't noticed at night, showed on his muzzle. She suddenly thought that this cat, despite his thinness, was beautiful, not flashily, but with a restrained, almost noble beauty. "Well, little one?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. "How are you doing?" The cat opened one eye, looked at her, and Sarah felt her heart clench. The wariness from yesterday was gone from his gaze, but a certain depth still lingered, as if he knew more than he could show. She reached out a hand, but stopped, remembering not to scare him. The cat, as if sensing her intention, slightly moved his tail and closed his eye, as if letting her know he was all right. Sarah stood up and headed for the kitchen to put on the kettle, but on the way her gaze fell on the corner of the entryway where an old flower pot, which they hadn't used in a long time, was sitting. She froze. In the pot, neatly, almost with surgical precision, lay evidence of the cat's business. The cat had clearly used it as a litter box. Sarah frowned, but instead of irritation, she felt surprise. She walked closer, examined the pot carefully. Not a single speck of dirt was scattered. Not a drop of water had spilled from the bowl standing nearby. Everything was so tidy, as if the cat had deliberately tried not to cause trouble. "Adam," she called quietly, but with a note of astonishment. "Come here and look." Adam, awakened by her voice, appeared in the bedroom doorway, rubbing his eyes. His hair was tousled and his face still showed traces of sleep. "What is it?" he mumbled, yawning. "Did the cat run away again?" "No," Sarah replied, pointing at the pot. "Look, he used the litter box. Well, the pot. But you understand? And he didn't make a mess. This isn't a feral cat, Adam. He's a house cat. Definitely a house cat." Adam walked over, looked at the pot, and frowned. He crouched down, examined everything carefully, then looked at the cat, who was still lying by the fireplace, ignoring them. His face grew more serious, but a hint of respect flickered in his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he said, finally straightening up. "Well behaved, I'll give him that. But that only complicates things. If he's a house cat, he definitely has an owner." Sarah nodded, but her heart sank at the thought. She didn't want to think that the cat might belong to someone else. Not now, when he had fit so naturally into their morning. She looked at the cat, who, as if sensing their conversation, slowly got up and stretched. His movements were smooth, almost graceful, despite his thinness. He walked over to the water bowl, licked it a couple of times, and lay down again, neatly tucking his paws. "Look how he's behaving," Sarah quietly said. "Like he's lived in a house his whole life. No spilling, no messing. He's not just a cat, Adam. He's special." Adam hummed, but his voice lacked his usual skepticism. He looked at the cat, and his thoughts were confused. He remembered how, as a child, his dog, an old shaggy hound named Baron, always knew his place and never misbehaved. This cat was similar. There was a certain training in him, an almost human discipline. "All right," he said finally. "We need to feed him and go into the area to see if anyone's looking for a lost pet. If he's this well-behaved, someone definitely lost him." Sarah nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the cat. She went to the kitchen, got out a little more chicken, and sliced it into small pieces. When she returned to the living room and placed the bowl next to the cat, he looked at her but didn't eat. He only slightly nudged his nose into the food, as if out of politeness, and closed his eyes again. "He doesn't want it," Sarah said. Her voice was full of worry. "Maybe he doesn't like it? Or is he sick after all?" Adam shook his head, but his face grew more serious. "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe he's just not over the cold yet. Let's give him time, and I'll go into the area and see what I can find out." Just then, Chloe rushed into the living room. Her eyes shone with excitement. She clearly hadn't slept all night thinking about the cat, and now her face glowed with joy. "Mom, Dad, he's still here!" she exclaimed, seeing the cat. "What did he do all night? Did he run away?" Sarah smiled, pointing at the pot in the corner. "No, he didn't run away. And you know what? He turned out to be very well behaved. Look how neatly he did everything." Chloe ran to the pot, her eyes widening in surprise. "Wow!" she exclaimed. "He's like a real house cat. Mom, does that mean he lived with people?" Sarah nodded, but her smile was a little sad. She looked at Adam, and their eyes met. They both understood that this cat, with his tidiness and strange knowingness, wasn't just a stray. He had a story, and that story might not be as simple as they had hoped. The cat, as if sensing their gazes, raised his head and looked at them. His green eyes were calm, but they still held a sorrow that wouldn't leave Sarah alone. She felt her throat tighten and turned away to hide her emotions. Chloe, oblivious to her mother's state, ran over to the cat and sat down next to him but kept her distance as her mother had taught her. "You're a good boy," she whispered to the cat. "You're the best cat in the world." The cat looked at her, slightly tilting his head, and Sarah thought he understood her words. It was strange, almost impossible, but she couldn't dismiss the feeling any more. This cat was more than just an animal. He was a messenger, the keeper of a secret that they had yet to unravel. Adam, meanwhile, put on his coat and headed for the door. "I'm going to go to Aunt Vivian's place," he said. "Maybe she knows something. You two keep an eye on him." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She looked at the cat, and her heart beat faster. She knew the morning would bring new discoveries. And something told her that those discoveries would be about more than just the cat. They would be about themselves, too. The blizzard outside the window was calming down, but a new storm was brewing in the Miller house. A storm of feelings, questions, and premonitions that had already begun to change their lives. Sarah, wrapped in her warm shawl, looked out the window, where the snow lay in a smooth blanket covering the tracks of yesterday's storm. Her thoughts were consumed by the cat, but now a new feeling was added to them, a premonition that this day would bring answers that she both awaited and feared. She turned to look at the cat and noticed he had opened one eye, observing her. His gaze was calm, but the same depth that gave her no rest still lingered in it. Chloe, having woken up later than usual, ran into the living room. Her hair was messy and her cheeks were flushed from sleep. She immediately rushed to the cat, but stopped a step away from his bed, remembering her mother's instruction. "Good morning, Kitty," she said quietly, her voice full of tenderness. "Did you sleep well?" The cat looked at her, tilting his head slightly, and made a faint sound. Not quite a purr, but something close, as if he was answering her. Chloe beamed, her eyes shining with joy, and she turned to Sarah. "Mom, he answered me, did you hear? He's not scared any more." Sarah smiled, but her smile was a little strained. She walked up to her daughter, crouched down beside her, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, sweetie, he's getting used to us," she said, trying to speak calmly. "But we still don't know who he belongs to. Dad is out in the area now, checking if anyone is looking for a lost cat." Chloe frowned, her small fists clenching, but she said nothing. Instead, she looked at the cat again, who was now slowly stretching. His movements were so smooth that they seemed almost dancer-like. He stood up, circled his bed as if checking that everything was in place, and walked toward the water bowl. He licked it a couple of times, but without much interest, and returned to the pillows, neatly tucking his paws. "He's still hardly eating," Sarah quietly said. Her voice was full of concern. "We should take him to the vet, just in case." Chloe nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the cat. She suddenly jumped up and ran to the kitchen, returning with another piece of ham, which she carefully placed on a saucer. The cat looked at the food, slightly twitched his whiskers, but didn't eat, only nudged his nose into the ham, as if out of politeness. "Maybe he's just not hungry," Chloe suggested, but uncertainty was clear in her voice. She looked at her mother for confirmation. Sarah was about to answer, but at that moment the front door creaked open, and Adam walked into the house, brushing snow off his coat. His face was stern, but something new flickered in his eyes, a mixture of surprise and thoughtfulness. He took off his hat, tossed it onto the rack, and looked at Sarah and Chloe. "Well, Dad?" Chloe jumped up, her voice trembling with impatience. "Did you find anything?" Adam shook his head, but his gaze slid toward the cat, who, as if sensing his arrival, lifted his head and looked at him. Their eyes met, and for a moment Adam thought the cat was assessing him, as if it knew what he was about to say. "No one at Aunt Vivian's has asked about a cat," he finally said, sitting down on a chair and rubbing his cold hands. "I went to a couple of houses, asked the neighbors. No one has lost a gray cat. And besides, people in the area say that even dogs don't run around in a blizzard like that. Where did he come from? It's a mystery." Sarah felt her heart sink. She looked at the cat, who was now sitting on his bed. His green eyes shone in the morning light. This news should have made her happy. If no one was looking for the cat, he could stay. But instead of joy, she felt a subtle pang of anxiety. If the cat didn't have an owner, why was he so well behaved? And how did he end up in their remote location during such a storm? "What about the vet?" she asked, trying to conceal her worry. "Is there one nearby?" Adam nodded. "There's one in the next town over, about 10 miles away. Aunt Vivian gave me the number. I already called. He's seeing patients today. We can go check if everything is all right with him." Chloe immediately jumped up, her eyes blazing. "Let's go! I want to go!" she exclaimed. But then she looked at the cat. Her face grew more serious. "Will he be scared? In the car? On the road?" Sarah smiled, but her thoughts were on something else. She walked to the window to look at the snow again, and suddenly she froze. On the porch, right by the doorstep, a mark was visible. Not human, not animal, but something strange. It was as if someone had dragged a thin branch through the snow, leaving an intricate pattern. She frowned, trying to understand what it could be. The mark was too clear to be accidental and too strange to belong to any known creature. "Adam, look," she quietly called, pointing to the porch. "What is that?" Adam walked over, his eyebrows furrowed when he saw the mark. He opened the door. Cold air rushed into the entryway, and he stepped outside, carefully examining the snow. The mark extended from the porch toward the fence, but it ended abruptly, as if whatever left it had simply vanished. Adam crouched down, ran his hand over the snow, but said nothing. His face only grew more thoughtful. "The wind, probably," he mumbled, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Or some kind of bird." Sarah didn't answer, but her heart was beating faster. She looked at the cat, who was now sitting on his bed, watching them. His eyes were calm, but something new flickered in them, as if he knew what they had seen and was awaiting their reaction. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This mark, this cat, this silence after the blizzard. It all fit into a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. "Let's go to the vet," she said finally, trying to speak firmly. "We need to find out if he's okay, and maybe he knows something about cats like this." Adam nodded, but his gaze was still fixed on the mark in the snow. Chloe, ignoring her parents' tension, ran to the cat and began to talk to him quietly, telling him that they were going to see a nice doctor who would help him. The cat looked at her, slightly tilting his head, and Sarah again thought he understood her words. They started getting ready, but something new hung in the air, a premonition that this cat had brought with him not only the mystery of his arrival, but also something greater, which had already begun to change their lives. The mark in the snow was just the beginning, a hint of the story that awaited them. Sarah looked at the cat, and her heart sank. He wasn't just a guest. He was a key to something they couldn't yet understand. Adam, checking his car keys, kept glancing at the strange mark on the porch that he couldn't get out of his mind. "Dad, are you going to take him in a box?" Chloe asked, her voice full of concern. She looked at the cat, who, as if understanding her words, slightly tilted his head. "Won't he be scared in there?" Adam, standing by the door, nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was still trying to figure out what kind of pattern he had seen in the snow. It didn't look like the tracks of a bird or a beast, too clear, too meaningful. He dismissed those thoughts, deciding that dealing with the cat was more important right now. "Don't worry, honey," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "I found an old box in the garage. We'll put a blanket in it. He won't be scared." Sarah walked up to the cat, cautiously reaching out her hands. She expected him to pull away, but he just looked at her. His eyes were so deep that she paused for a moment. He allowed her to pick him up. His body was light, almost weightless, but warm, as if he had absorbed the heat of their house. Sarah gently wrapped him in a soft towel and handed him to Adam, who was already holding the box lined with a blanket. "Be careful," she quietly said. Her voice was full of tenderness. "He trusts us." Adam nodded, but his gaze was serious. He carefully placed the cat in the box, and to their surprise, the cat didn't resist. He only settled down comfortably, tucking his paws. His ears twitched slightly, but he didn't make a sound, as if he understood that he was being taken somewhere he would be helped. Chloe, standing nearby, looked at the cat with such care that Sarah couldn't help but smile. She knew how much her daughter had grown attached to this little creature, and that feeling grew with every minute. But Sarah felt something else, too, a premonition that this cat was not just a random guest, but a key to something bigger that had already begun to change their lives. They left the house, and the cold air hit their faces, making Chloe shiver. Adam carried the box with the cat, trying to keep it level so as not to disturb his passenger. Sarah locked the door, casting a final glance at the mark in the snow. It was still there, clear and mysterious, and something told her that it was connected to the cat, although she couldn't explain how. The car started on the first try, and they slowly drove down the snowy road leading to the next town. The snow crunched under the tires, and the landscape around them was so white that it seemed almost unreal, as if they were driving through a fairy tale world. Chloe sat in the back seat, holding the box with the cat on her lap, and occasionally peered inside, checking to see if he was all right. "Is he sleeping?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Sarah turned around, looked at the box, and smiled. "Not sleeping, but he's calm," she replied, noticing that the cat had opened one eye and was watching her. "He knows we're taking care of him." Adam, concentrating on the road, was silent, but his thoughts were on what he had heard from Aunt Vivian. She had mentioned an old story about a house on the edge of the town that had been empty for several years. Rumor had it that an old man lived there who loved cats and kept dozens of them, but after his death, the house was abandoned and the cats scattered. Adam wouldn't have given it a second thought, but Aunt Vivian added that the old man always said his cats saw more than people did. That phrase stuck in his head, and now, looking at the cat in the box, he involuntarily wondered, what did this cat see? The drive was long, and the silence in the car grew heavier. Sarah looked out the window, where the snowy fields drifted by, and her thoughts returned to the cat. She remembered how he had looked at her at night, as if trying to say something. It wasn't just animal instinct. There was a certain awareness in his gaze that was both frightening and mesmerizing. She turned to Adam. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Did you notice the way he looks at us?" she asked. "Like he knows what we're thinking." Adam hummed, but his face grew more serious. "Sarah, don't start," he said, but his voice lacked his usual skepticism. "He's a cat, smart, well-behaved, but a cat. Don't make things up." But Sarah wasn't so sure. She looked at Chloe, who was quietly humming something to the cat, and her heart clenched. She knew her daughter already considered the cat part of the family, and that feeling was contagious. Sarah herself felt this small guest awakening something long forgotten in her, a desire to protect, to care, to believe in miracles. When they pulled up to the veterinary clinic, a small wooden house with a sign almost buried in snow, the cat suddenly let out a faint sound, like a sigh. He lifted his head, looked at Sarah, and something new flickered in his eyes. Not sorrow, not gratitude, but something like expectation. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what awaited them inside, but she was sure this visit would reveal not only the cat's condition, but also a part of his secret. Adam parked the car, took the box with the cat, and headed for the door. Chloe walked beside him, holding Sarah's hand. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Sarah looked at the sky, where the clouds had begun to part, allowing weak rays of sun to shine through. She felt that this day would change everything, not just for the cat, but for them, too. The mark in the snow, the cat's gaze, the silence after the blizzard. It was all part of a story that had already begun to unfold, and they were at its very center. Inside, the clinic was unexpectedly cozy. The wood-paneled walls were covered with old photographs of animals, and a small wood stove crackled in the corner, spreading warmth. A senior veterinarian, a man with a thick beard and kind eyes, met them with a smile. His hands, covered in wrinkles, moved confidently as he gestured for them to approach the table. "Well, who do we have here?" he asked. His voice was low but gentle, as if he was used to calming not only the animals but their owners as well. "Let's take a look at your stray." Adam placed the box on the table, and Sarah carefully opened it. The cat raised his head, looked at the veterinarian, and for a moment Sarah thought he was assessing him, as if deciding whether to trust him. The veterinarian slowly extended his hand so as not to startle him, and the cat, to everyone's surprise, did not flinch. He only slightly tilted his head, allowing the man to pet him. A calm fellow," the veterinarian noted. His eyes carefully examined the cat. "Thin, of course, but not emaciated. Clearly been hungry, but not for too long. Let's check him over." He gently picked up the cat, placed him on the table, and began the examination. His fingers expertly felt the fur, checked the ears, eyes, and teeth. The cat sat still, only occasionally moving his tail, and Sarah couldn't help but admire his composure. Chloe, standing nearby, kept her eyes fixed on the veterinarian. Her face was serious, as if she was afraid of missing something important. "Mom, he'll be fine," she whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. Sarah nodded, but her heart beat faster. She looked at the cat, and her thoughts were confused. Something told her that this examination would reveal not only the cat's condition, but also something more, a hint of his past, of why he had appeared on their doorstep. The veterinarian finished the examination and pulled out a small device, like a scanner. He ran it over the cat's neck, and his eyebrows slightly rose. "Well, well," he muttered, looking at the screen. "He has a microchip. That means he definitely belonged to someone." "Let's check the data now." Sarah felt her throat constrict. A microchip. That meant the cat had an owner, and their hope of keeping him might be crushed. She looked at Chloe, whose eyes were already glistening with tears, and squeezed her hand tighter. Adam, standing nearby, frowned but remained silent. His gaze was fixed on the veterinarian. The man connected the scanner to an old laptop, and after a few minutes, information appeared on the screen. He read it carefully. His face became thoughtful. "Interesting," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "The chip is registered to a Mr. Ivan Peterson, who lived in a house on the edge of your town." But he hesitated. His gaze grew more serious. "This man died 2 years ago. The house has been empty ever since." Adam and Sarah exchanged glances. Their faces reflected a mixture of surprise and alarm. Adam remembered Aunt Vivian's words about the old man who loved cats and said they saw more than people did. He felt a chill run down his spine. "So he's his cat?" Adam asked, trying to speak calmly. "But how did he end up with us, and why now?" The veterinarian shrugged. His eyes were still fixed on the cat, who was now looking at him as if understanding every word. "It's hard to say," he replied. "Cats are mysterious creatures. This one seems to have been wandering for a long time, but he's healthy, just a little weak. I'd give him some vitamins and advise feeding him small amounts often. As for his appearance—" He smiled, but there was a hint of mystery in his smile. "Sometimes they choose who they go to themselves." Chloe, hearing this, beamed, but Sarah felt her heart clench even tighter. She looked at the cat, who now lay on the table, tucking his paws, and his gaze was fixed on her. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't explain, not just gratitude, but something deeper, as if he knew he hadn't led them here by chance. "What about the chip? Does it say anything else?" Sarah asked. Her voice trembled. "Maybe there's someone else looking for him?" The veterinarian shook his head. "No, only the owner's name and address. If the house is empty, the cat was likely left alone. But it's strange that he's so well maintained. Strays usually aren't this well groomed." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She remembered the mark in the snow, that strange pattern that looked like nothing familiar. She looked at the cat, and her heart beat faster. This cat wasn't just a stray. He was connected to something larger, to a story that stretched from the past and was now weaving itself into their lives. Adam, meanwhile, was lost in thought. He remembered Aunt Vivian talking about the old man who lived alone, surrounded by cats. Maybe this cat was one of them? And if so, why did he come to them? He looked at the cat, and for a moment it seemed to him that the cat was looking straight into his soul, as if he knew the answers to all the questions Adam hadn't yet asked. "All right," the veterinarian said, standing up. "I'll give you some vitamins and instructions on how to feed him. If you want, you can keep him. He's healthy, but he needs warmth and care." He paused, looking at the cat. "Keep an eye on him. Something tells me he didn't come to you for nothing." Chloe clapped her hands with delight, but Sarah and Adam remained silent, their gazes fixed on the cat. They thanked the veterinarian, took the box with the cat, and headed for the car. The snow still lay all around, but now it didn't seem so cold, as if the sun breaking through the clouds had brought with it hope. The cat, sitting in the box, looked at them, and his eyes were as mysterious as they had been on the first day. Sarah felt that this visit was only the beginning, and that the cat they had saved was now leading them to something bigger, to a secret waiting to be uncovered.